Welcome to the Fox One Corp series of SeeYou training videos. I'm Dave Springford. Please check out my website at www.foxonecorp.com for all the gliding products that I can supply. The link is posted in the comments section. Please subscribe to this Fox One Corp YouTube channel, and if you have questions, post them in the comments below. In this video, I'll show you how to add an existing airspace file and give you a few tips on the Barogram view, how to move around the flight in the route and Barogram view, as well as how to open multiple flights to play back a maggot race. To load an airspace file, we have to go to Tools, and we select the Airspace option. In this window at the bottom, it's going to show us all the airspace files that are currently loaded. To add a new airspace file, simply click on Add, navigate to the folder on your computer where the file is located, select the file you want, and select Open. We can see now that the second Rockton 4 cub file has been added. When I click OK, we can now see airspace has been added onto our route view. So what we'll do next is I'm going to open an IGC file so we can take a look at an IGC file. So two ways we can do this. We can go File and Open, or you can simply use the Open Quick Access icon here. So we'll open a file, and what I want to do is open this one. And so right now we've opened in Barogram view. To get back to our route view, we simply click on our quick access icon here for route. So what we can see on the route is we can see the airspace. And so in the flying area here, there's a Class C control zone here. There's another Class C control zone here. There's a Class D down in the bottom. We have a restricted area here on the approach corridors into Toronto, and these concentric rings are Toronto's Class C airspace. And so what we want to do is take a look at this file, and I'm going to just zoom in around here where the flight trace crosses through the airspace. So you can see that the flight goes through this blue zone, it goes through the red zone, and what we want to see is this a problem, or were we clear of the airspace? And so one method that we have for doing that is, again, we can go to Tools, and we can go to Options, and then we can go to this Graphs. And in Graphs, there's two important features that we should select: Show Terrain Profile on Barogram View and Show Airspace on Barogram View. So both of those are selected. We'll say OK. And what we'll do now is we want to take a look at the Barogram view to see if we're vertically clear of this airspace. So as I've said before, we can move the plane anywhere we want on the map just by double-clicking on a certain point on the trace. So what we can see right now is I've moved the airplane right to this spot where it's inside both the red and the blue airspace. And so if I go to the Barogram view here, remember we said that the red line shows the position on the Barogram view. I can move that by double-clicking. So I can double-click to the right and move away. I can also use the left and right arrow keys. And by doing that, I can move the flight one point at a time. And if I just hold the arrow key, it moves it multiple points. We can also make those same moves up here with these previous position and next position arrows, but that's a little laborious. One click moves it one at a time. Another way to move through the flight a little bit more quickly is to use these previous thermal and next thermal. So if I click on previous thermal, it takes me back to the last climb, and the climb before that, and the climb before that. So what we really wanted to look at when we were in the route view was, were we clear of the airspace? So back in the route view here, we're just going to move the glider forward, and I'm just pressing the arrow key right now. And we're going to move forward until we get into this intersection of the red and the blue airspace. And now we're going to go back to the Barogram view, and we can see there we are. And by selecting Add Airspace to the Barogram view, I can see a blue box here that represents the blue airspace circle, and I have a red box here representing the red airspace circle. So we can see that the flight was conducted beneath the floor of the blue airspace and above the ceiling of the red airspace. So in that case, everything was good. Now you may have noticed, if you've been looking around the screen a little bit, that at the end of the flight over here, the trace actually goes through the red airspace. And so let's take a look at that on the root view. So the easiest way to get back to full screen is to just click here and go back to Fit Flight. And now using my zoom icon down at the bottom left, I'm just going to zoom in on the last part of the flight here. And we can see that truly the flight crossed directly through this control zone. As I said earlier in the video, this is a Class D control zone. Go back to our root view, and we can see we were definitely vertically inside, and we also saw on the root screen that we were horizontally inside. In this case, this is my flight, and I had received, don't need a clearance because it was Class D, but I was communicating with the tower, and that was a legal use of their airspace. In terms of moving around the flight, as we saw before, on the root view, I can also use these icons and go next thermal, and I can start looking at, we'll just jump through a few of them until we get into the flight. We can see how often we stop to thermal just by pressing next thermal, next thermal. And that gives us an idea how close together our thermals may have been and where we had some nice long runs. All right, so that's one way to navigate through. As I said before, you can also use the arrows. I can press and hold the arrows and go through one at a time, and that allows me to navigate. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to show you the multiple flight option. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to Open, and I want to select two flights from the same day. So I have Glider 1 and Glider 2, both from the same day. And so in here, if I use the standard Windows Shift Select, I can select both flights at the same time, and I can open them. And that will open a completely new window and load both the flights. If I press the stop icon up here for the animation, we can see that both flights are loaded. So loading two flights is fairly simple, or multiple flights, you can just shift select or control select within Windows. Another way to do this is we can go to Edit, and we look at Add Flight and Remove Flight. So right now we can see I have Pilot 1 and Pilot 2, and if I no longer wish to have Pilot 2, I can just click on it and say Remove. And now we're back to one flight. If I wish to add again, I can go back to Edit, Add Flight, and then I can select Pilot 2, and I can open that flight. It's going to tell me that the task is different between the two IGC files. So generally what you want to do is select your flight first where you're confident the task is properly set, and then select the second flight. And then when it says, do I want to copy the task from flight 1 to flight 2, say yes. And that way you're guaranteed you have the same task for both. So that gives us a method to add and remove flights. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to step through this flight a little bit again to get us out of the start circle. And we can see there we have Glider 1 and Glider 2 progressing on course. We can control the rate at which they move with this clock icon here. If we put this at 1 time, that's real time. So if it's a 3-hour flight, you'll sit and watch for 3 hours. Most of the time I use 20 or 40 times. We'll put 40 times in here to make it move fairly quickly for us. By pressing the play icon, we can see that both gliders are moving. As I said in a previous video, my preference for the icon that we use to show the gliders is the stick with a flag with the contest letter. So we can see Gulf 1 and Gulf 2, Glider 1, Glider 2, and the length of the stick is indicative of their height. And so we can see right now Glider 2 is fairly high, Glider 1's a little bit lower. If we hit stop, that's going to reset the flight back to the beginning. So that's not the best option. So we can pause the flight by pressing the play arrow or by pressing the pause arrow. And to play the flight again, we want to press play. Pause it, we can press pause or play. As the flight is playing, we can see down here in the flight parameters window that we have glider 1 and glider 2, and we have parameters associated with each. The focus right now is on glider 1. That's identified by the little red dot beside glider 1. If I want to move the focus to glider 2, all I have to do is come down here and double click on glider 2, and we can see the focus has now been moved to glider 2. And what that does is it actually tries to keep glider 2 centered on the screen instead of glider 1, or it tries to keep both of them on the screen. So that's a really quick demonstration of animating flights. So in this flight, what I've shown you is how to load a single airspace file that already exists, how to set the terrain and the airspace inside your Barogram view, how to add and remove multiple flights, as well as how to play back a flight in the route view. One other thing I want to mention in the Barogram view here, I'm going to hit stop. In the Barogram view, when you have multiple flights playing, it will not show the airspace or the terrain. That's one of the shortcomings here. So I still have the previous flight open. And remember, we said we can navigate through windows by just going to Windows and selecting the previous flight. So there's the first flight. I can go back to Barogram. And we talked about the red and the blue indicating airspace. The other thing we can see is the brown at the bottom. That gives us the terrain. So that's elevation. The other thing that it shows us is it shows us these blue dotted lines. That's the start of the task. That's turn point 1, turn point 2, turn point 3, and the finish. And we can see down at the bottom, it gives the name of the start point, the first turn point, the second turn point, the third turn point, and the finish point while its text is off the screen. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new about SeeYou. Please visit me online at www.fox1corp.com.